Hello Motors, it is I, Darwin Stein, your personal TerraTech arms dealer. As you can see, I have been developing a magnetic accelerator cannon from Halo. This block was suggested and voted by you guys in the previous video for the DMS Community Research Grants. Development for the Mac has started since last week. Not only that, I'm going to be using this occasion to walk you through the process of creating an unofficial block with TerraTech. Think of this as a beginner's guide to TerraTech unofficial modding, which oddly enough has never been made, at least to my knowledge. My aim for this guide is to get more people into the modding scene, so they can get started to make their own dreams come true. Now you're gonna need several tools to get started. The first thing on the list is TTM M2. Go to the link in the description and look for TTM M2 releases. Follow the GitHub link and download the zip file. Extract it, then run the executable file. Make sure the TerraTech installation is correct and hit continue. Now you will see a list of code mods available on GitHub. If you're not sure what to pick from all of this, I suggest getting the mods on my list. But for our purposes today, you'll only need the block injector and mix mods. After downloading them, you can close the mod manager. The next tool on our list is a code editor. There are a multitude of choices, but I'm gonna be using Visual Studio Code. It's free and has a lot of features that will help us on our modding journey. The last thing we're gonna need is a 3D modeling software. As you can probably guess, I'm using Blender 3. You can use any other 3D modeling software that you're familiar with. Now that you have all the tools you need, let's dive into it. The first step of creating an unofficial block is getting a reference. Start your game and start a new creative or R&D. Now look for a vanilla block that best represents the block you're making. In this case, I'll be using Hawkeye Railgun for its high muzzle velocity and nice particle effects. Spawn the block in game, then press the backtick key on your keyboard. This will bring up the Miss Mod window where we can get our reference. Right click on the block, then on Miss window, press export parts of selected block. Now we have a model reference for our block, which can be found at this location. And we also need to get JSON reference. On the same window, click on export block JSON. This will dump the JSON file to this location. And then we also need to get the fair data for projectile behavior. Now we need to locate those references. Go to your TerraTech installation folder and you'll see the export folder. Inside model parts, you'll find 3D models for the blocks you just dumped. There are 3 separate model parts here. This is the mount or the third part, which will rotate left and right. And this is the body or the gun part, which will move up and down. And finally we have the base, which will be attached to other blocks. After knowing what parts the block we're referencing are made of, now it's time to make the same parts in our own image. As you can see, I already have 3 separate models prepared. The gun part, which will move up and down, the third part, which will rotate left and right, and the base, which will hold them down together with other blocks. 3D modeling is a whole different ball game, and we're not going to cover that today. But if you guys are interested to learn my modeling workflow, please let me know in the comments. Now this is where the magic happens. Go back to your export folder and go to block JSON. And we'll find the JSON file for the block we're referencing. In my case, it's this one. Open it with VS Code. And this is what you're gonna see. Don't be discouraged by the sheer amount of words and jargons you're saying right now, because we'll only be using just a fraction of it in our block. Think of this JSON as the DNA of the block we're referencing according to the block injector. Our objective is to tell the block injector the difference between this vanilla block and the block we're making. So in practice, we can edit just the variable we want, and the block injector will handle the rest without ever messing with things like tank block scaler, clutter swapper, and so on. The most important thing we need to learn from this JSON is the structure. Notice how gimbal base is the parent of gimbal aleph, which is the parent of barrel, and so on. Now that we have the tools and references, it's time to make our first prototype. Go to your custom blocks folder and create a new text file. Let's call it mac.json. And open it with VS Code. To save time and avoid typos, I'm gonna copy the JSON from my previous work. I'll provide you with the finished product in the description so you can use it as reference as well. Since we're not gonna be porting anything to Steam, we'll go ahead and delete this bit and this bit. Let's start from the top. As you can probably guess, this name field is what will be displayed in the inventory. And that goes without saying for description. This ID field is a unique ID that you have to claim in order to prevent your block to conflict with other mods. Go to the forums and go to this thread. Inside, you will see modders claiming their ID spot. So if you plan to share your modded block to the community, you're gonna have to do the same thing. Faction is pretty obvious, we'll leave it at 5 for Hawkeye. And for category, we'll leave it at 4 for weapons. Grade will start from 0, so 4 will be read by Block Injector as grade 5. And we'll set up rarity to rare. And for the price, we'll set it to a number that's appropriate to the size of this Mac. And for the recipe, we're gonna need a calculator. This recipe calculator was originally created by my good friend Rafs, and I've uploaded a copy to Google Docs for easy access, and you can go ahead and make another copy for yourself. In the spreadsheet, we can fill out the amount of components and we'll get the price and recipe for it. We're gonna keep adding the components until the price reaches 100k. We can always check what the components does in the wiki. For the Mac, we'll use a bunch of Kaufman cells and ion pulse cells. If you're happy with the composition, go ahead and copy the cell and paste special here for values only. Now we only need to copy this array of numbers to the recipe field. Now we need to figure out how big our Mac actually is. Making a grid of 1 by 1 by 1 cubes like this will be a huge help. Go ahead and count how many blocks this Mac will occupy on X, Y, and Z axis. Don't forget to leave some room for the rotation. After we have the block dimensions, go ahead and set up the appropriate health and mass. As for fragility, we'll set it up to 0 so it will never fall off unless destroyed. And we'll set the damageable type to 1 for armor. Now we need to create the icon for our Mac. You can do this in Blender. Press 0 to check your camera and then press F12 to render an image. And we're gonna save this as mac.png. For attach points, we're gonna use the bottom part only. You can tell that they are bottom APs by their Y value of -0.5. Now we need to tell Block Injector which vanilla block we are referencing for this block. Go ahead and open your exports folder, find your reference inside model parts. Copy just the folder name like this. and make sure the number is inside a round bracket. Now it's time to export our models. Go back to Blender and export as OBJ. Check selection only and also check triangulate faces under geometry. We're gonna call this one macgun.obj and do the same thing for the other parts as well. Inside sub-objects, we can enter our models under mesh name. And for collider mesh name, we need to create a collider model back in Blender. Making a mesh collider is pretty simple. Duplicate our models and hide the originals. And we're gonna remove the materials. Materials are not needed for mesh colliders because it only works to simply bump into other things. Now we just need to turn them into convex shapes. Go to edit mode and under mesh select convex hull. After that, press F3 and type in limited dissolve. This will decrease our polygon count drastically, making the collider more optimized. Repeat the process for the other parts and export them as OBJ. And make sure our colliders have different file names than our actual models. Now put in our models and colliders inside sub-objects, while making sure the file names are correct for each object. Check again in model parts if you're not sure. And this is our first prototype. You can edit the JSON block later after respawning in game. And now's probably a good time to open our reference. Before we jump into the game, we need to fix our grade. Previously I've set it up to 5 and the block didn't show up. And I changed it to 3, which means it's gonna be Hawkeye grade 4 and totally fine. And here we are in R&D. Go ahead and look for our block in the inventory. As you can see, nothing makes sense right now, and that's okay, because we're gonna use some transformation on these models. Bring it to the target practice so it has something to aim for. First thing we're gonna do is move the base into place. You can put transformation in the sub-objects under sub-position, sub-scale, and sub-rotation. By putting 3 in the y-axis here, we're moving this base 3 cells up. And we need it to be centered as well, so I'm putting 11.5, which is half our block dimension, into x-axis. Press Ctrl S to save your JSON and go back to the game. To apply the changes made in our JSON, we can press Shift Alt B. The block injector will apply these changes we just made in real time. As you can see, the base is now somewhat centered, and we just need to refine these numbers until the base is dead center. Notice how the gun's elevation is slightly off. This means we need to put transformation on it as well. Now that the gun's elevation is in place, we need to bring the whole thing to the center. Under reference offset, put in the numbers we used to transform the base. This will bring the entire thing to the center of the block. If you see some misalignment, simply keep refining the numbers until they are in place. After making sure the models are in place, we can move on to correcting the bullet spawn. As you can see right now, the bullet spawns inside of the gun. We can correct this in the JSON block. Looking at our reference JSON, we can see that bullet spawn is under barrel, in the same level with muzzle flash, recoiler, and cannon barrel. Now we want to move bullet spawn along with the other game objects in the same level. We can do this by moving the parents instead, in this case barrel. So go ahead and create the same hierarchy as we can see in our reference JSON. Now we want to apply transformation to barrel, and I'll copy it from my other block. Place it inside barrel and adjust the numbers. So close, we just need to move it forward a little bit. Okay, the bullet spawn is in place. Next, we need to adjust the rotation limits of our Mac. In the reference JSON, you will see gimbal aimer under both gimbal base and gimbal LF. Rotation limits is what we want to change. We won't be changing the axis, so we can delete that. You can always go back to Blender and confirm the rotation limit by transforming the model. Keep your eyes open for any clipping and make sure the model have enough room to rotate. Now that the block behavior is refined, we'll move on to Projectile. Fire data contains everything about Projectile. I'm copying it from another block to save time and getting rid of anything unnecessary. Reference for fire data is in separate JSON, which can be found here. Open it and we'll create the same structure in our fire data. This is where we define our bullet damage and properties. Since these stats were copied from nuclear torpedoes, we're gonna have to drastically scale down the explosion. Since we don't need to edit the lifetime, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. Because the Mach is a kinetic weapon, we're gonna scale up the bullet damage here. M damage is how much destruction our bullet is going to cause in the moment of impact, which will be followed by the M explosion we just set up. And we're going to set the damage type to impact as well. For our Mach, we will need a very high muzzle velocity, so I'll set it up to, say, 500. I'm going to leave these particle effects from the nukes and comment them out. It looks like our bullet is phasing through the enemy. To fix this, we need to create a bigger hitbox for our bullet. Again, I'm copying it from the nukes. Here we're using a capsule collider. Radius tells us how big the capsule collider will be, and by placing the center at 4 on z-axis, the capsule will be created 4 cells forward from our actual bullet. Height is how long the capsule will be. Since our bullet will have a very high velocity, we'll leave it at 5. Direction is an array for 0 to 2, which corresponds to x, y, and z axis respectively. By setting it to 2, the capsule will be lying down, facing forward. Okay, it looks like our bullets have stopped phasing through things. Now we can move on to particle effects. I'm gonna reactivate particle effects we got from the nukes and see what happens. Yeah, that definitely needs some refining. I'll go ahead and mess with it while keeping an eye to the structure in the reference JSON. So, after much experimentation, this is our particle effect for the projectile. And this one is for the explosion that follows. I'll provide you with the finished JSON file so you can study it as well. Congratulations, we have successfully developed a magnetic accelerator cannon. Now our mod is ready to be shared with the community. You will find the files in custom blocks. Go ahead and put them in a folder, call it Mac or something. After you zip it, you can put it in forums and share it with other people. Well, that wasn't too hard, was it? Well, maybe it was somewhat tedious if you're doing it for the first time, But now you can start working on your own unofficial block. And if you ever run into trouble, feel free to ask me or any modders on Discord or forums. Surely we can be of some assistance if we have the time, that is. So, this has been a beginner's guide to TerraTech unofficial modding. This is Stein signing off.